Thank you, McKenna. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me and see me okay? I also would ask you to please mute your phones so that, because otherwise I might be tempted to answer it if it rings out loud. My name is Joan Stein. I'm President of Stein Consulting. This is my 20th year speaking at NFMT. Somebody said to me this morning, well, do you know what you're going to talk about? I said, I've been doing this for 31 years as an ADA consultant. If I don't know this by now, shame on me. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about ADA. You do know that I'm not here from the American Dental Association or the American, it's a joke. You can laugh. I know, it's mid-afternoon, the blood sugar's kind of dropping. It's the Americans with Disabilities Act. The other thing I want to tell you before I start is I don't want you to wait until the end to ask me questions or to make a comment or even to argue with me. I'm always up for a good challenging discussion. So if you have something you want to say or something you want to share or you want to ask, please do so. I may be the content expert in the front of the room, but you all are the experts, and I learn from you, and more importantly, you learn from each other. So before I get into that, by a show of hands, how many of you work for an organization that has had an ADA complaint filed against them? Okay, a couple of you. I may rely on you to kind of walk us through and you're here, so you're still alive and in one piece, so that's good news. Okay, so let's get started. Where did the time go? July 26, 1990, last century, was when the ADA was signed into law on the South Lawn of the White House by former President George Herbert Walker Bush. People say to me, when do I have to comply? I say, last century. Well, but when do I really have to comply? January 26, 1992 was when all existing facilities had to begin to inspect their properties and perform what's called readily achievable barrier removal. There's no grandfathering in the ADA, and there's no exemptions under the ADA. If you're an existing building, you were to start that process last century, and it was to be and is to be an ongoing process. So here we are. March 2020, COVID hit. You know, I missed last year's session here in Baltimore because I was recovering from COVID. And as we like to say, or we don't like to say, there was pre-COVID, and now there's COVID, and now there's post-COVID. And it's a completely different reality for all of us. But COVID really had a major impact on how we operate our facilities, how we designed and constructed, how we altered, and how people worked. Did they come to work? And when they did come back to work, what did we have to do to accommodate people being in buildings again? I understand that I just got here yesterday, but I understand that the trade show was very, very busy yesterday, which was wonderful for the show, because last year and the year before, there was hardly anybody here. So we're still dealing with COVID, and I have a feeling we will probably deal with COVID for the foreseeable future. But time didn't stop. You know, the world, everything really kind of stopped around us, but it really didn't. Because what happened was the ADA requirements, bless you, took a back seat to what was going on with COVID. And under the federal law, under the ADA, under the federal requirements, there's really only one time or two times where something will supersede the ADA requirements, and that's fire and life safety and health and safety. So COVID clearly kind of jumped to the front of the room and to the front of the line and became, you know, the end all to be all. So it pushed the ADA requirements around, but it didn't make them go away. And I'll tell you why. What changed was restaurants. You know, how many of you know of several of my favorite, I'm from Pittsburgh, anybody from, well, several of my favorite restaurants literally went out of business because they couldn't, you know, reimagine themselves to be able to do takeout and delivery and that kind of stuff. So restaurants were doing takeout. Some of it was good, some of it was not good. Then they started using outdoor seating, and I will tell you that restaurants doing sidewalk seating, probably 99% of them just totally missed the boat, just totally got it wrong. And I'll tell you that they not only messed it up for people with mobility disabilities, people using wheelchairs or walkers, they messed it up for everybody. Have you ever tried to walk down a city sidewalk where there's outdoor dining? I mean, you can't, or either that or you're falling into a planter or a server's knocking you over. You just can't do it. So you have bad weather and you have bad setup. And it all kind of culminates into, pardon my French, a shit show. Am I going to be bleeped? I don't know. Well, do we have time delay on that?
That's accurate.
I'm sorry?
That's accurate.
Yes, it is accurate. It is accurate. So we have a bad setup here. You know, the slide on the left, there's nowhere to walk on that sidewalk. Or on the right-hand side there, that whatever that is, it's a heater. You know, oh yes, let's be warm, but let's not leave enough space for people to be able to get around there. You need to be able to provide a minimum of a 3-foot wide path for people to be able to either walk or roll or whatever. Minimum 3 feet. Shorter, smaller than that, it can't be done. Some more bad setup. This picture on the other side over here, you know, it's up steps. An accessible route cannot include stairs. And I get very frustrated, and my friends who have mobility impairments get very frustrated when they call someplace and say, are you wheelchair accessible? Are you ADA compliant? Oh yes, we only have 2 steps to get in. Well, you know, you might as well be on the top of Mount McKinley. If my best friend and I want to go out, she drives a 450-pound motorized wheelchair. How do you think she's going to get up even 1 step, let alone 2 steps? Oh, we'll carry her up. I don't think so. I really don't think so. I used to say to business owners, if you're going to expect your employees to carry somebody in their wheelchair up a set of steps, you will have the newest members of the disability community, because your employees will have a back injury and you'll have an open workers' comp claim on your hands. And then you get the deer in the headlight response. So you have bad setups. And it really is unfortunate, because all you have to do, I know we have so much going on at work and so much to deal with, but sit back for a moment and think about it. Or put yourself into a manual wheelchair and try to wheel around and see if you can get in somewhere. That's a better setup. That's a picture, because that's a 3-foot wide opening in between those tables. Now, the plants, it's kind of iffy, because what happens with those plants is that there's something in the ADA requirements called a protruding object. And a protruding object is relevant for somebody with a visual disability who's using a cane. And if something comes off of the wall and it's more than 4 inches off of the wall, and it's between 27 inches and 80 inches above the floor, somebody using a cane is going to miss that on their cane sweep. And if they miss it on their cane sweep, they're going to smack right into it. So those plants, although they wouldn't necessarily cause bodily harm if you walk into them, it could be very startling if that's the first thing that your face hits. So it's important to remember that when we talk about ADA issues and accessibility, we're not just talking about people who use wheelchairs and people with physical disabilities. We're talking about people with visual disabilities. We're talking about people with hearing disabilities. When you go into a restroom, into a public restroom, the next time you walk into the men's room or the ladies' room, look to see if there is a visual strobe, or back at your own facilities, do a check to make sure there's a visual strobe in that bathroom. The need for that is that if the fire alarm goes off and there's an audible signal, without that strobe flashing, if I'm sitting on the toilet in that bathroom and the fire alarm goes off, without that flashing strobe, I won't know that there's a fire. So we have to realize that Braille on room signs and an elevator, somebody said to me once, what's the point of having Braille in an elevator at a parking garage? Blind people don't drive. And I said, well, I worked for a man for 3 years who is blind. And whenever we went anywhere, first of all, he would argue with me about which was the best way to drive somewhere. And unfortunately, too often he was right. I didn't tell him he was right, because then that was a lost cause. But he was responsible for us getting back to the car. So if we drove in the parking garage and we were on the 4th floor, he would remember we were on the 4th floor, and he was the one that got me back to the garage. So don't think just because people with visual disabilities don't drive, you still need Braille. So what are some of the other things that changed? Some of the other things that got added to the built environment? Because what you have to understand is, as facility managers, you're responsible for everything. You're responsible for speccing what goes in, you're purchasing it and making sure that you're purchasing the right thing. And I will tell you, I don't remember if I have it on a slide later, but if I do, it will bear repeating. If you go to buy something and it says meets ADA requirements, don't believe it. Okay? Just don't believe it. Do your own research. Because one of my favorite examples is there is a company that makes a feminine item dispenser. And it says meets ADA requirements on the front of the dispenser, and it has a turn handle. It cannot, to meet ADA, it cannot require tight grasping or twisting of the wrist to operate. How does that happen? Because the industry that designs and markets products is not regulated by the ADA. And these companies, truth be told, they'll lie. They'll lie to sell you something. So you have to peel away the layers of the onion. Any golfers in the room? Okay, I work for the United States Golf Association for the US Open. And we have vendors who rent us the porta-johns that we put on the property. And of course they have the ADA porta-john. And one of the things that they do with that is they charge you more for it, okay? But the issue is, I got into literally almost a physical altercation with one guy that was installing them because he tried to tell me that the one they were putting in met the ADA requirements. And what it did was it had the toilet in the front, and then it had a solid bench down to the end of the porta-john. And I said, okay, so explain to me how I get onto the toilet. And he said, well, you come down here, and you pull down your pants, and you get onto the bench, and then you slide down to the toilet. I said, are you serious? Would you have your mother do that? You know, like when somebody swears and you say, do you kiss your mother with that mouth? You know, the reality of it is that the ADA compliant porta-john has an open space next to the toilet so that you could wheel up and do a side transfer. Why don't the vendors like that one? Because that has a 35-gallon tank and the other one has a 68-gallon tank. So the one with the 68-gallon tank doesn't require as much maintenance as the other one. Too bad, okay? So don't believe it. But here are some things, as you've probably recognized by now. I'm very tangential. Was there a question back there? Okay. Yes, sir.
So these items that you say are being advertised or noted as being ADA compliant, how can they advertise and not be held liable for non-compliance?
Because the question was if they're marketing and advertising these items that are ADA compliant and they're not, how can they do that? How can they get away with it? Because they're, in all honesty, they're not breaking a law, they're just lying. They're not breaking the ADA because what the ADA does is it regulates. I have a friend from the Access Board that says when you turn the room upside down, whatever doesn't fall is covered under the ADA. So items and elements. Now what would happen is the manufacturer of that item would not necessarily get sued, but you as the facility that installs it could get sued. So it is unfortunate. What you have to do, quite honestly, is you're the customer. You're the paying customer. You need to hold their feet to the fire. You need to say, show me the cut sheet for that. Show me where it meets the regulations for does not require tight grasping or twisting of the wrist to operate. Those kinds of things.
So in advertisements, they're not required to stipulate complies with whatever the speculation
right.
Section of the ADA regulations.
You're correct. They are not. They're not held to a truth in advertising requirement. Yeah. Now, if they say it meets section blah 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 blah, and you know that it doesn't, then you could have some recourse. But you can't go to the Justice Department and sue them. What I would do, quite honestly, that can be more effective, is take it to the media, take it to social media, because that'll hurt them more than a complaint to the Justice Department will. Hit them where it hurts.
How about FTC?
I don't know. It doesn't, like I said, there isn't a law or regulation that covers that yet. It might, who knows? Hope springs eternal, okay? So, I'm sorry?
I was just going to say, sometimes it
Yeah.
seems like it's a misunderstanding of the requirements also. Like I purchased a sink that indicated it was ADA, met ADA requirements, but the full thickness of the wall-mounted sink made it so it was impossible to mount it at a height and have knee space below that matched the ADA requirements.
You're absolutely right. There are times when he bought a sink that the thickness of the wall mount made it impossible to mount it. And you bring up a very important point, and that is purchasing the product is the first step. installing it is the most important, because you could buy something that is ADA compliant, but if you mount it at the wrong height, then you're out of luck. Yes, yes, because particularly with sinks, you have to have the top of the apron has to be at a certain height, and the knee clearance has to be, in the old days, like last century, when they used to sell those elongated sinks and they wanted everybody to believe that you needed to buy those to be ADA compliant, they really are not good, because what makes a sink ADA compliant is, like you said, where it's mounted, how much knee clearance there is, and to be honest with you, that elongated bowl makes it difficult for people with limited range to be able to reach the paddles. And they charge you more for it. And they're ugly. So do you need any other reasons why you shouldn't buy them? But you look at that and it meets ADA requirements and you figure, okay, I'm fine. You're really not. So it really is, you want to do your homework and make sure that you're mounting it in the correct location. And the other thing, particularly in bathrooms, when we're back to talking about people with visual disabilities and the protruding objects, what I find very, very often in bathrooms is that the paper towel dispenser is mounted on the adjacent wall right at the sink. And what that does is that's a protruding object for somebody walking to the sink, and if they're doing a cane sweep, they miss the cane sweep walking to the sink and they get smacked with it. So you want to be very careful about those kinds of things. So the hand sanitizers, they, of course, COVID, being clean, it takes precedent. It supersedes everything else. But again, you want to be careful, and particularly the hand sanitizers are mounted on corridors. And somebody with a visual disability, they orient themselves to the wall. So that's where they're going to run into that. Now, I'm hoping that as the industry progresses, that they can make hand sanitizers that are no more than 4 inches deep. And that would solve the issue. That would solve the problem. So, have they closed? Have they reopened? What's going on? Are any of you in the restaurant industry? Okay, so let's move on. Don't go overboard. If you're going to put hand sanitizers in, yeah, you want to put them fairly close together, but you don't have to have 20 hand sanitizers in a room this size. So, what is the ADA? It's not the American Dental Association. It's the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's first and foremost a civil rights law. It was modeled after the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And the requirements are written like building code. Now, the major difference between the ADA and building code is that building code does not require you to do anything until you're renovating or newly constructing something that requires a set of plans to be approved by a code official. ADA, as I said a few minutes ago, January 26, 1992 was when your clock started to look at your existing facilities. So what happened there? So it really is both. It's both a civil rights law and a building code. And this list will tell you that it basically covers everybody. There really is only one category that is two entities that are totally exempt from the ADA. Religious organizations, private clubs, Congress, and single-family residences. Now, I'll go in reverse order. Single-family residences, Congress basically said, that's your home. you design and construct it, do it any way you want for you. Congress is exempt from the ADA because they were covered since 1973 under the Rehabilitation Act. Private clubs are exempt. However, if they hold events, wedding showers, baby showers, high school reunions, proms, they have to comply with the ADA. Yes.
I have a question.
Okay.
What do you mean by private club?
A private club is American Legion, VFW.
Country clubs?
I'm sorry?
Country clubs?
Country clubs, yes. Where the Masters tournament is held, Augusta, that's a private club. Now, let me ask you, American Legion, is that members only?
Yeah, if they're not open to the public and stay members only, then they don't have to be involved.
Okay. But if the public comes in, if you hold a bingo at a VFW, then it has to be accessible. Yes. 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 Did that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I saw that you had local and I forgot the criteria, and then you jumped to Congress.
Oh, yeah.
The first one. So how about federal agencies? I didn't see that.
Federal
Are you
agencies.
talking about later?
No, federal agencies are covered under the history of disability laws was in 1973, the Rehabilitation Act was written, and that covered all federal agencies, Congress, and any private business that had a contract with the federal government in excess of $50,000 and public education. So if you have, I'm from Pittsburgh, the University of Pittsburgh is a public higher education institution. So they are actually required to comply with both the ADA and the Rehab Act. But the requirements are the same. So federal agencies had obligations since 1973. The ADA didn't come into being till 1992.
So that's why it's attributed to George Sr. Bush.
Yes, yes,
I
yes.
was trying to, I understood the sequence. Now
Yes.
it's crystal clear.
Okay,
Thank you.
excellent, excellent. Okay, and private clubs. So yes, if a private, Augusta is a private club. In fact, I think they admitted the first woman, Condoleezza Rice, like 5 years ago. So she checked off 2 boxes for them, But they hold a major PGA tournament there every year. So they have to comply. And as I say to golf clubs all the time, first of all, aren't your members getting older? And doesn't your sales department want to schedule weddings and baby showers and bridal showers there? So grandma wants to come too. Okay, so the ADA is a complaint-driven law. There is no inspection like OSHA or EPA. It is regulated by people with disabilities who believe that their rights have been discriminated against, filing a complaint. If they file, the requirements have been in place since 1992. The penalties, if the Department of Justice finds you in violation, your first penalty is $75,000. Each subsequent penalty is $155,000. And all buildings, all covered buildings, are required to comply. So that's if the Justice Department is enforcing it. The other way that it's also enforced is through federal court. And in a couple slides, I'll talk to you about what happens when individuals have law firms that represent them and do what we call drive-by lawsuits, whereas they pull into a parking lot for a big store and they see some things wrong. Maybe there's no curb cut there, or maybe they're missing a sign, and then all of a sudden the business owner gets a letter saying, you're in violation of the ADA and we'll settle, you pay our legal fees. Because the person with the disability does not get any monetary damages. The law firm gets their legal fees, and we won't go there. We won't go there. So what are your responsibilities? Everything. And if it's not your responsibility, you usually get blamed for it anyway, right? Okay. There are 3 key components to ADA compliance. First, you have to design it right, then you have to construct it right, and then you have to maintain it. I just want to tell you, this PowerPoint will be on this show's website. So if you don't have to worry about taking, scrupulous notes and all that, because what I find and have found over the years is that you're sitting here going, oh my God, they don't believe me when I tell them that back at work. Now you have somebody who made this presentation who's singing your song, and you want to show your bosses, hey, this is the real deal. This is real business. These are 3 very important things, and I will tell you that the one out of the 3 that's the hardest for you to manage is number 3, maintaining it right. Let me give you an example. There were germaphobes before COVID, okay? COVID made it go viral. So what happens? You have a bathroom. It's designed correctly to provide it's called maneuvering clearance, which is the space beside the door. When you go to pull a door open, you're required to have a minimum of 18 inches beside the door, so that when I pull the door open, I'm not hitting myself with the door. That's the maneuvering clearance. So the architect got it right and provided the 18 inches. The contractor got it right and built the 18 inches. Then you have the housekeeping staff who's tired of picking paper towels up off the floor, because the germaphobes use a paper towel to open up the door, and then they drop the paper towel on the floor. So what do? They put the garbage can right next to the door. All of a sudden now, you have a barrier. You have a barrier that's preventing somebody with a disability who's using a walker or a wheelchair to be able to get close enough to the door to pull it open. Is it a permanent barrier? No. Is it a barrier nonetheless? Yes. So it's very, very difficult to get everybody in an organization to be on the same page. But it's a critical component. So we're in Baltimore. I usually say this when we're in Las Vegas, but we're in Baltimore. What we say here stays here. How many of you over the years have done an ADA self-evaluation, a study of your facilities? Show of hands. Okay. How many of you have done something with it besides put it on a shelf? That's very good. Because if you didn't raise your hand, I can't give you legal advice because I'm not a lawyer, but if you didn't do anything with that report besides put it on the shelf, I would suggest that you shred it. Because if somebody files a complaint and they come to you, the Justice Department comes to you and says, what have you done? And you say, oh, well, we did this great survey, and look at this, and then they say, and what have you done? What progress have you made to remove those barriers? And you go, hubda, 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 hubda. Remember Ralph Cramden? Oh, come on. I'm not that old, am I? If you don't have an answer for that, you would be better off saying, gee, I thought this was the American Dental Association. So you want to make sure that you do a step-by-step facility inspection and make sure you know what you're doing. And the most important thing you want to do is record every non-compliant item. Now, there are people, I've had clients over the years who have said, I want you to tell me what's right. Okay, That's fine, but it's more important for you to know what isn't right so that I can tell you how to fix it. And take pictures. People lie, pictures don't. Okay? Take pictures. And when you're chronicling things with photos, take a before picture, and then after you fix it, take an after picture. And put a plan together. There is no magic to putting a plan together, and there is no magic to the length of time for an ADA plan. It really is dependent on the resources you have available. But I will give you one very strong piece of advice. Don't ever tell them we can't afford to do that. Because the minute you say we can't afford it, you will have to open up your books. And it's not a pleasant procedure. It's not anything pleasant to go through. And if you're part of a multi-location organization, they will look at the assets of your entire organization. What happened there? Okay. So we want to look. Any questions right now, as we're moving along? Yes, sir.
Is there a checklist through the maybe the ADA website or government website? Because it seems like this is a self-help or self-inspection. So how do you do that?
Well, yes, there is a checklist that was developed by an organization up in New England that was funded by the Justice Department. And so what you could do is Google ADA checklist. Now, what I'm going to tell you is if it's a company that wants to sell you their checklist, don't buy it. It is from the Disability Technical Assistance Center. They're called DBTACs, Disability Business Technical Assistance Center. And the DBTAC up in New England wrote this. And it's pretty good, but I will tell you very honestly, because I've had people over the years say, well, we need you to dumb it down. Well, yeah, I got to tell you, everything that is required in the ADA is important. You know, you can't just say, I've had people say, well, we're a little bit compliant. I said, that's like being a little bit pregnant, you know. So, but the issue is that a lot of those questions that are asked on that survey form assume that you know what they mean. Like they say, do you have an accessible route? Well, you know, there are 9 components to an accessible route. So it is a very good start. And I would suggest that you look at that. Anything that you do is more than what you did before, and that's a good start. So yes, go on, and if you can't find it, I have my card up here. Reach out to me, and I'll send you a link for that checklist. And as I said a minute ago, yes.
Question, and maybe you don't know. Do you know if the different levels of LEED criteria have specific guidance for compliance with ADA?
No, LEED has no interaction with ADA whatsoever. Yeah. Everybody heard what the question was? LEED certification, you know, and I'll be very honest with you. I had a very hard time when LEED started out because I thought, you know, they're more worried about the sustainability of a building than they are about people being able to get in and use a building. But I've gotten over that. You know, a couple years of therapy, I got over it, and we're moving on. But the issue is that you want to make sure that you do something, do anything. If you don't have the money this year, put it into a budget. Make a line item every year. And the other thing is that a very important part of ADA, when I say maintaining it, is the things that you do on a regular basis. When you check your fire alarms, when you check your batteries, make sure that you're doing things like check your railings on your stairs, your handrails on your stairs. When you go outside your facilities, check for cracks and divots and breaks in the cement, because the ADA requirement is that you cannot have a horizontal or vertical change in level greater than a ½ inch. And what that does, first of all, because you could get your cane tip caught in it or a wheelchair wheel, but what it also is it's a trip and fall hazard. And I will tell you that personal injury lawyers make ADA look like a day at the beach, okay? Because they'll get tons of money from you. So you want to, and the other thing is make sure that your insurance carrier knows what you're doing, because this is part of active risk management to be doing this. So make it a living document. Put it into your construction budget. Yes?
Well, since you're speaking of budget, so just a scenario, if you're planning on making something ADA compliant, budget involved, you're trying to get the powers that be, the money people to understand.
Right.
But we have to get this done. Is there a period from the time that the work starts that if you have somebody come in and they end up infringing, or not infringing, but it's something that we should have had fixed a while back, but we're now having it fixed, but the work hasn't started.
Yeah.
So they put in a complaint. So since we hadn't started the ball rolling, are we still liable for?
That's a very good question, and that's a very insightful question, because that shows you the difference between waiting till a complaint comes or doing it proactively.
Yeah, what's the time limit after a person sees an ADA violation and makes that complaint?
There is no time limit. The only time that a time limit is put into place is once somebody files a complaint, either in court or with the Justice Department, and you're found in violation, then they will tell you how much time you have to fix that and how much money you have to fix it. So if you are doing it at your own volition, right now, if you went back to work tomorrow and started on an ADA project and you haven't had a complaint filed against you yet, you're still being proactive, okay? And you get to control the process. The minute that complaint gets filed and either a judge or the Justice Department steps in, you lose control of the situation. You lose control of the timing, you lose control of the finances, and all that. Now, there are businesses who say, well, we're not going to do anything until we have to. And I say, that's like painting a sign on your back that says, kick me. So I always encourage people, do it while you have control. And yes, it's 32 years later, but you still have control over it. So build it right and then maintain it. Document everything that you do. So, it's easy for you to document your facility changes, but make sure that you do some training. Make sure that you do some training for the housekeeping staff so they don't undo all the good work that you did. And make sure that you have policies and procedures. I can't tell you how many times I've read about situations where a business has gotten slammed because somebody with a disability was treated badly by a receptionist or by whomever, and I'm telling you, there are stories where people are told, we don't want you here. Excuse me? So you want to make sure that you document everything that you're doing to be proactive. Start follow the ADA priorities. And the ADA, there are 4 priorities under the ADA. Number 1 is getting in the door, which starts out at the sidewalk and your parking lot and your parking spaces. And that's where those drive-by lawsuits happen, because they can pull into your parking lot, take some pictures, put down a slope tool, take a couple measurements, and be off. And the next thing you know, you're getting a letter from the lawyer. And I'm telling you, I can quote you verbatim these complaints that come, because all these law firms do is change the names and the addresses and send them out to you. Okay? The next priority is getting access to the goods and services. So if it's retail or it's a restaurant, or if it's now if you are a place of employment where people primarily are working there, you still have to have access to the common areas in that building, getting into the building, to the receptionist desk, where people go for interviews, where conference rooms, where meetings are held, break rooms, and so forth, and restrooms. Access to your restrooms, and then other elements such as signage and fire alarms. I will tell you, signage is the most cost-effective way of providing access, because if I have a full bladder and there's only one accessible restroom on this floor, you telling me where it's located will bode us both very well. Make sure, and this is, are there any architects in the room? Okay. I love architects. They're my competition, they're also my clients. But there are also a lot of architects who believe that they know what the ADA is about. And they treat it as a building code. And they say to you as the client, don't worry, I have it covered. We deal with codes all the time. No. You want to make sure that they meet the minimum standards. I have a colleague, Ray Bloomer, who says the ADA should be the worst that you do. They are the minimum standards. And since we're talking about that, it's also important that you understand that the way the ADA standards are written, they have the construction tolerances built in. A slope for a parking space or an access aisle is a maximum of 2.1%. So if you're going to spec it at 1.8 or 1.9 to allow for that asphalt or that concrete to settle. Because if you spec it exactly at 2.1 and your contractor comes back and says, oh, that's construction tolerance 2.3. No, it's not. That becomes a slippery slope. Grab bars in a toilet stall. And this is where I catch it with contractors all the time. It's 33 to 36 inches above the finished floor to the top of the gripping surface. Not to the center line of the grab bar, to the top of the gripping surface. Because if you think about it, somebody isn't grabbing the middle of that grab bar, they're grabbing the top of it. So your construction tolerances are built in. Use that in when you spec, okay? Make sure that your accessible features are maintained. If you have elevators in your building, make sure that they stay operable. Because having an elevator go down, and this happens, any of you do public housing? It's a big issue in public housing, isn't it? When elevators go down, because you got somebody who's in their 70s or 80s and they're a wheelchair user and they're on the 8th floor, they're stuck. So you want to make sure you keep it in operable condition. And check and recheck your installations all the time. Here's my favorite slide. I said to you a couple minutes ago, don't wait for the complaint. Turn the posse into a parade, because then you will have control over the situation. If you wait, they're going to tell you what to do and how much money to spend. And remember, don't tell them you can't afford it. When the complaint arrives, there is no way for you to prevent yourselves from being hit with an ADA complaint. It is a complaint-driven law. How you deal with it is going to determine the outcome and how successful an outcome you will have. Don't argue it, because you're spitting into the wind. If it's made, if the complaint is filed by an individual, first and foremost, don't give in, okay? And I mean that in all honesty. Allegations are just that. They are allegations. Until you get an objective professional assessment of how your facility looks, you need to have an even playing field. So their complaint, I worked with a woman back years ago when we were building PNC Park for our baseball team. And it is one of the most accessible ballparks in the country. And we did community meetings with the members of the disability community. And this woman said, well, I don't want the counters at 34 inches. I like my counters at 28 inches. I said, that's fine. You can do that at your house. But this is for the public. It has to be usable for the most number of people. And trust me, if the complaint comes from the Justice Department, don't argue with them. They will work with you if they believe that you are going to be cooperative with them. 5 minutes, I have, okay. Try to get an independent professional assessment done, have the allegations carefully reviewed, and put your focus on removing the barriers. Now, what happens a lot of times with the drive-bys is that the people doing it only find a couple things. Look at your whole property, because if you address everything in your property and you put an ADA plan together, not if, but when somebody else comes along, you'll be ready for them. You can't go by the code, because again, the building code is different from the ADA regulations, and the requirements are not the same, and they're updated. Building code is updated more often than ADA is. So, are you grandfathered in? No. When do I have to do something? Last century. My local code official gave me my occupancy permit. I'm okay then, right? No. Because all that code official is reviewing for is building code. And I will tell you very candidly that most code officials really don't care about ADA. They are more concerned with fire and HVAC.
My apologies, but regarding the building and how do you kind of set that policy up beforehand regarding ADA and FCC?
What about buildings that were constructed before the ADA was passed?
Okay, buildings that were constructed before the ADA, you have to go in, those are considered existing facilities, you have to go in and do an inspection and see what is non-compliant. Even if there was no ADA, if it was before the ADA, you still have to identify, because that's going to tell you what you have to fix. Okay?
Also, if the building is not kind of up to standard, or regarding like if the elevators are not, up to standard, I mean, things are not always going to be perfect all the time.
Right.
But how do you go about doing that?
Well, with an existing facility, you're obligated to do what's called readily achievable barrier removal. That's Congress speak. Do what you can when you can. You cannot, if your elevator cab is too small, cab, if the body of the elevator is too small, you really can't do anything about that. That's not readily achievable. But if you don't have grab bars, or you don't have a ramp, and you can put a ramp, and those are the kinds of things that are considered readily achievable. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
I think you answered it, because I did
Yes, yes, yes.
You can make reasonable changes if you're in the process of making some upgrades.
Well, and that's a very important point. There are 3 levels of compliance. For an existing building, you're to perform readily achievable barrier removal. Do what you can when you can do it. When you are altering or renovating, what you touch, you have to make it accessible. And then you also have to make a path of travel to that space that is accessible. When you're building something new, everything has to be accessible. Everything has to be ADA compliant. And if you think about it, that's a blank slate. So you really, unless there are reasons, there are 2 reasons why you don't have to fully comply with ADA in new construction. It's more Congress speak. Technically infeasible or structurally impracticable. Let me push my teeth back in place. Yes. Yes, sir.
Question, if your facility is, say, has a sidewalk in public space that has a lot of compliance issues with ADA, cracks in the sidewalks, uneven, and what have you, and you have a client that trips and falls or injures himself because of that issue, and they make a complaint to you because they don't know any difference.
Right.
In your space, and they complain to you, what would be your recommended action?
You're recommended, you have a client that falls and it's a public sidewalk. First and foremost, you want to check your lease. You want to make sure whose sidewalk that is. Is that the municipality's sidewalk and their responsibility, or is that yours? And if in fact, and I've had a lot of situations over the years where I have done inspections of like strip malls and places like that, where I've given the information to my client and said to them, you need to share this with your landlord and show them what they are responsible for fixing and that you paid for the inspection. So that was, but if you're not otherwise obligated, like if you're not obligated to do snow removal or remediation or that kind of stuff, chances are you're not going to be held liable. What will likely happen is that they'll sue both. They'll sue you and they'll sue the city, and then they'll leave it for the courts to fight it out. Yeah. Good question. Yes. Any other questions? Okay, let's move right along here. I only have 10 employees. You all have more than 10 employees, right? And you have multiple parking lots and entrances. Wherever you have an entrance and parking nearby, you need to have accessible parking. And there's a table in Chapter 2 in the ADA standards that tell you that for so many accessible parking spaces, how many of them have to be van accessible and how many you have to have based on the total number of parking spaces. Architect told me everything was all right. Challenge it. Yes.
So I get that, and I work at a museum.
Okay.
So architect gave us just as many spaces as we needed. We have our common age is 65 and above. What do we do when we run out of spaces, which we often do?
You run out of, well, first of all, you know your market. These are just minimum standards. If you want to exceed that, you're going to make your client base much happier. But the point is that when you run out, you run out.
So it's just a matter of making our patrons happier to come see us.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if you're all familiar with Eaton Park. It's a chain in Pittsburgh. They double the number of designated accessible spaces because most of their customers are senior citizens. So they want people coming back. It's where it's market driven. Okay, let me show you a couple because I'm getting the high sign in the back. And again, this will be on the website, right, McKenna?
Yes.
Okay. So let me show you. These are some examples of things that you would not necessarily pay attention to, but they're big issues. cracks in the sidewalk, that spacer, the paver spacer, carpets. I don't know if I'm allowed to do this. There's a vendor down in the exhibit hall called New Pig, and they have carpet runners that stick on the floor because the ADA requires if you have carpeting, all the edges have to be fixed to the floor. Yes. Protruding objects. That desk there, somebody doing a cane sweep is going to get smacked in the belly, much the same as that water fountain. And there's that toilet, that paper towel dispenser I told you about. Remember, there's no underwriter's laboratory for ADA products.
How about indoors?
Doors?
You said certified as opposed to endorsed. Is there any
Neither.
Okay.
Neither.
Thank you.
Truthfully, yeah. There it is. There's my picture of the feminine item dispenser with the turn dial. Okay. Hi, Tim. Bars. Any of you spec furniture? Okay. Everybody loves pedestal tables, but pedestal tables don't work because you can't get the knee and toe clearance underneath the table to be able to get there. And if you're speccing bars, you have to have a lowered section of the bar. And unfortunately, too often, I see bars that the wait staff use that as their work area. I won't even go there to talk about these pictures. Accessible facility currently unavailable. Would you accept that? You know, these are just examples of, you know, I don't know about you, but anybody using that toilet paper dispenser, you'd have to be Gumby to be able to reach that.
The handrail's over 18 inches away from the toilet.
That's right. That's right. Here's my wait a minute. There's my the ADA compliant porta-john. There's the one on the right is how it's supposed to be, where there's space beside it to be able to transfer. There's no maneuvering clearance there at that door. Well, I'm just showing you some things here that, down here on the bottom, if any of you have done this, that's called a built-up curb ramp. Where's the bottom picture there? You can't use those because your entire access aisle has to be level. And who are you?
You mean the whiteout area has to be level with the sidewalk?
Yes. It all has to, the curb ramp has to go up into the sidewalk, but in addition to that, you need a 3-foot deep level landing at the top. So in that kind of situation, what I would recommend is that you do what's called a parallel curb ramp, that you would cut out that sidewalk and then just have 2 90-degree ramps off to each side. The end of the story is we're talking about everybody. We're talking about 1 in 4 people in this country have a disability. We're all aging. You know, without my glasses, I wouldn't be able to, well, I still can't see what your name tag says, but you get my point. So, you know, it impacts all of us. And people with disabilities spend money. You can use, if you're an eligible entity, you can get a business expense deduction of up to $15,000 a year for the cost of removing barriers, which can also include purchasing equipment. And that's it. Thank you all. I think I ran a couple minutes over. 6 minutes, yes.